Welcome to Mindful School Marketing, your go-to podcast for personal and professional growth.
We're school marketers, business owners, and moms passionate about connecting other school professionals with tools and strategies for success.
We love solving problems, exploring new ideas, and thinking outside the box. Let's transform your school and life starting right now. Transform your school's admissions and marketing with Inquiry Tracker, the ultimate solution for managing inquiries seamlessly. Discover how you can make your admissions process more efficient and effective with this leading solution.
Welcome to Mindful School Marketing. I'm Tara Clays.
And I'm Aubrey Bursch. Today we're joined by Whitney Retzer. Whitney leads engagement, outreach, and much more within the Microschools Network at microschools.com. She is based in Cyprus and has a global background from working in K-12 and higher ed in the USA, Japan, Thailand, UAE, Azerbaijan, Cyprus, India, and Honduras. Welcome, Whitney. We're so excited to talk to you today and learn more about Microschools.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a list of places that you've lived. It's quite intriguing. And I'd love to spend the whole time talking about that. But let's start with the basics of what we're talking about today, which is microschools. So can you tell us what exactly is a microschool and how does it differ from traditional or private independent schools?
Well, first of all, I'll say that there isn't, let's say, a widely accepted definition of microschools. If you talk to researchers who study microschools and homeschool adjacent learning communities, no one can really agree. But for our purposes today, or for I think what we mainly agree as a community of learners is we're very small, intentionally small learning environments. Think schools of maybe 25 all the way up to 200. So some larger schools that are around 170, 175 even consider themselves microschools. And so these are small learning communities that foster a deep sense of belonging and community. And typically they're operating like mixed age groups. If you kind of think about the Montessori style, where maybe you have 6 to 8-year-olds grouped together, 8 to 10-year-olds. And so they're learning content that's really customized based on their needs. And so I think one of the things that these schools are offering, something that large public and private schools isn't, is this kind of flexibility and customization of learning and an agency as well, that it's just simply a lot more difficult the larger that you get. And typically these schools are also using community resources. So, I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Because they don't have giant sprawling campuses like a lot of beautiful private schools or the public schools as well. So they're using the city or their area as a campus, right? They're using local libraries, gyms, they're going to yoga studios, they're going to museums, parks to use playgrounds. And then as far as setup go, a lot of them are independent schools. They might be incorporated as a nonprofit with board governance, or they're private schools as well. And I guess the main thing is that these are really the ideology is that we're adapting to the learner versus the teacher. And that's really the ethos of a lot of micro schools.
Thank you so much
So-
for... Oh, go ahead.
I know it's a lot to unpack. So
Yes, it is. And I'm so curious, like you mentioned, like what did you say, 160 or something in terms of student population? Like, I'm curious if our audience was thinking, oh, micro schools, that's like when they have 10 to 12 people in their school. But no, you're like, oh, it could be at like 160, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I look at our numbers, we have more than 200 member schools at Microschools Network, and the majority are 25 to 50 students. But then above that, then we've got a community of more than 100 learners. So there's a big gap. And then once in a while, you do run into really small schools. And I think, like, if you think about from a lot of times accreditors, they don't consider a school unless it's operating out of a separate location. So if you're operating out of your home, even if you have a lot of other students, then they wouldn't consider that for accreditation reasons.
So interesting. I'm curious, and I'm thinking our audience is as well. Microschools have been around for a while. But lately, I mean, I've been hearing it in the news, there's just a surge of this interest lately about microschools. Could you kind of reflect on like what's driving the current growth in this movement?
Yeah, I think there's so many different factors. I think what one of the main things that really perpetuated was the pandemic, right? All of a sudden, families got a really good look into what was happening inside their kids' classrooms and education, and they started rethinking what education they wanted for their kids. And then also, we're just at such a crazy technology point, right? Where technology is enabling all kinds of alternative learning environments, learning setups, hybrid hubs, all this sort of things that happen. And then we've got things like, on the national front where um, there's all kinds of public funding that's available for private education, vouchers, ESAs. That's ESAs are educational savings accounts for those that don't know. And so there's more than 30 states now that have some sort of school choice legislation on the books. And of course, they're voting on measures and introducing new things regularly. And so that's really been a catalyst for microschool expansion. And then I would say, on the international front, it is similar things in terms of people really wanting customization. They want a deep look at what's happening. They're wanting real world education versus maybe something more theoretical, entrepreneurship. They want flexibility within it. I think like you think about places especially during the pandemic, right? We saw lots of digital nomad visas and communities popping up everywhere. And so places like Spain, Portugal, Thailand, which have really big digital nomad communities, you're seeing lots and lots of alternative learning communities in those places as well. Italy and Greece and other regions too. And I mean, I think another thing too is homeschooling. Homeschooling is on the rise everywhere in the world. Anywhere that has data, homeschooling is happening more and more. And sometimes it's really surprising how significant it is. And I think a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes this is how microschool is the inception of it, right? It's a homeschooler and then another homeschooling family, and they're doing a collective, and then it grows to a couple of families, and then the person says, I should just turn this into a school. And so there's also these kind of homeschool collectives, which kind of go hand in hand with digital nomad communities. And then also, people just wanting to know and I guess have control of what their kids are learning. So I think that's a lot of things too. And then another reason we're seeing microschool growth or chat about is from charitable organizations. There's the last couple of years we've hosted some really great orgs at our conference, and they're creating microschools and digital learning communities for climate refugees. They're being in slums, refugee camps, even having online distance education for Afghani girls, right? So we've had 2 years ago, we had the guy, he makes schools on boats. So they use indigenous local knowledge, what's happening with the climate. They build schools, they're getting buy-in with the community to build boats based on what'll work. And then the school comes to them, picks the kids up at their doorstep. They go to school from the boat, especially in places where they have lots of flooding. And they've got playgrounds, they've got computer access, they've got a lot of different things that they're doing. We even had this last year Teach the World Foundation, and they're doing 2-hour shifts, and they're teaching kids really basic reading, math, and they're in a lot of slums and rural areas in like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malawi. And so it's really short, but it's still teaching kids basic skills so that they can go back to caretaking, they can go back to work if they unfortunately have to. But technology and I guess, maybe a change of mindset or people trying to help people understand that there's so many different ways to learn. We all learn all the time, every way, not just sitting in a four-walled classroom in a kind of conventional setting.
So interesting. I mean, I didn't really know much about micro schools, and it's so exciting to hear that this is going on all over the world, that it's really it's a global movement. Your work supports families and educators launching and leading micro schools. What are some common reasons that families are choosing micro schools? Not just, I mean, you talked about the legislation and those types of things, but beyond that, what are some other reasons that you're seeing why families are opting for this?
Yeah, I mean, right. I think it's people that they really want to know what's happening within their kids. There's also early adopters, people that are early on the education, entrepreneurship front. And so they're really excited about, oh, what's this new model of education? What does it look like? Flipped classroom, right? This is innovation. And then there's a lot of families that traditional education didn't work for them, right? And maybe that's because of safety, accessibility, kids that were just really disengaged in their own classroom. And so I think one of the big strengths is just due to the size, they promote a great sense of community, and it's belonging naturally by their size. I think in some environments, it feels like sort of an extended family reunion kind of vibes more than it feels like a school. And so kids that, they were really disconnected in their previous school and they needed more personalization, they needed closer relationships. There's just a lot of reasons that, perhaps there's undertones of safety as well that we've seen in some areas where larger school environments just weren't ideal for that child or that family. And I think, oftentimes maybe it's not all the family that opts into the micro school. Maybe they just need it for one of the children, and then some of the other kids are going to a more conventional public or private school. Um, and so, it's those kind of families that, they're early adopters, or they're having challenges within a traditional setting, and they're willing to trade off the sort of things that micro schools don't offer, right? Because they don't really offer transportation. They don't have a big sports facility or sports teams or theater or necessarily things like that, but they are customized, right? So then they kind of say, okay, well, I'm willing to trade this off because I know that my child gets really deep dive into things they're curious about. They're going at their own pace, whether they're gifted and talented in certain subjects, or maybe they need more time to adapt because they're just that's just not their strong suit. So I think it's, and there's sorry, Terry,
No, it's
continue.
okay. No, I was going to say, that's similar to, families who put some of their children in public schools and independent schools for reasons that's what they need. I'm wondering, we've talked about the movement and how it's grown and the reasons why and why families would choose, but how do families even find micro schools and differentiate between a micro school and the private school in their neighborhood? Is it becoming more well known in certain countries more than others, or how are they even discovering it? Is it a Google search? Is it a word of mouth through their local community, their church, their something like that? Where are people? How are they finding them?
Yeah, that's part of the challenge, right? Because they're small schools with limited marketing budgets, so they have to form tight-knit relationships within the community. So that's, talking to other feeder schools, maybe faith-based institutions, making relationships with that, pediatricians. We've had micro schools that just go around the area and are knocking on doors to let people know we're here, we're in the area. And I think that's one of the reasons we started the Microschools Network, was because we said we wanted to find a resource for parents to find out about the model, to learn about it, to potentially locate one. And so we have a great resource now where we have more than 200 schools. We have a map, you can search it out. And so we're the biggest search engine directory for microschools, at least that I know of. So that's one way. And I think in the US is probably, I would say, leading the pack in terms of micro schools that are available. But some places you go to, like Portugal and Spain, they've got so many different school types as well that I think they're well attuned to having a different, a variety of things. But I think we still need our own PR campaign, right? Because I think there's some misconceptions about what the schools are, if people even know about it, right? So I think that there's a lot of work to understand. And as far as differentiation, I mean, differentiation between like a private school, independent school versus a micro school, sometimes it's really hard to decipher what one is. And I think some private schools are also saying, "Oh, we're micro schools now," and some micro schools are trying to say that they're fully private. And so, yeah, there's certainly overlap, and I think that you just have to really, you have to do your research as a parent to understand what's happening. How big is the classroom? What does their curriculum look like? How are they reporting the evidence and data of learning? And if you're okay with them doing that, and their approach to doing so, then, so I think there's a lot of work from a consumer standpoint. I think anytime you're looking at any kind of schools, right, from public, private, micro schools, whatever you're evaluating, to find out what's important to you and how it fits into what your goals are, what your kids' needs are.
That's fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing. I'm just thinking like it's almost like, and if you're a micro school, you have like double like the marketing work. Like you have to talk to people about what micro schools are and then like your differentiator, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's certainly an education piece about, trying to convince people on the values of why that might be a great fit for your family because, we kind of were indoctrinated for a long time. Maybe that's not the right word, but anyway, that bigger is better, the more. And then it's like, yes, in some ways that's really good, but some families or some kids, they really don't thrive in that big of an environment. And so that's why there's, I feel like it's a really huge fracturing and segmentation of all these different needs, whether it's faith-based schools, farm schools, forest schools, eco hubs, schools that are LGBT friendly, schools that are offering like really entrepreneurship streaks, schools that are more like a, we work kind of experience 9 to 6, open year round. Your kid comes and goes as they please. They go through the curriculum. So it's just, I feel like there's a flavor for everyone, maybe not necessarily in your community, but it's available. It's out there.
I love that. I think, as people are different, schools need to be different, right? So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, like we've talked a lot about, independent private schools, and micro schools, and the majority of our listeners are probably independent and private school leaders, so as they're listening to this, I'm curious, and you did share a lot of this during your small school leaders conference presentation, which I was wowed by. Like in your view,
Ah.
it was a really good presentation. Like, how do you think, you know, micro schools and independent schools could collaborate or learn from one another? Like, are there areas of alignment or shared goals or ways that they can come together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's total alignment, right? Because they're serving students, they're serving their community of learners. Everyone's in it for teaching kids, right? And so I always think like, well, we don't necessarily need to be competitors, right? Because we're doing different things. And I think micro schools from an independent or private school standpoint, they can really learn a lot more about their approach to ongoing improvement, data collection, marketing and retention efforts. You know, micro schools often will struggle staying open past the 5-year mark. And so hearing from historic institutions, independent schools that have been in the community for 20 plus years, I mean, on their highs and lows and different governing structures that they had to go through. And there's so much wisdom that these older schools have to teach. And I think the more established independent or private schools, I think there's a great potential to reach new markets through micro schools and through partnerships and collaborations, right? I mean, we've seen facility partnerships, right? So micro schools have the access to be able to use theaters and sports facilities and things like that. We've seen programs that private schools are launching to serve like homeschooling communities or micro schools so that the kids have maybe it's like STEM Fridays, or we have this club that we're trying to do, or they have after school care, which micro schools often don't offer. So it's like maybe you want additional kids coming into your after school program. That's another sense of revenue that micro schools can either reach out to independent schools or vice versa, right? And then I've also seen independent or international schools think about, okay, well maybe we hop on the bandwagon and we try and pilot something that's directed for gifted and talented program, or maybe we have something like a really specialized little program that's for kids with learning differences. And we've also seen school within schools too, because of the flexibility that they offer, right? Some sort of hybrid environment. So you have the private schools, maybe you have super competitive athletes that are going to have an attendance issue with the way that they're currently, their schedules are aligned. But if we have a school within a school, so that the kids can participate in the big school events, but they can also participate on their own time flexibly, then you can serve a whole other group of learners that maybe you hadn't thought of. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities. I mean, we even saw boarding schools that started to offer micro schools for staff retention because they didn't have, a smaller kid program. So we have a little micro school on campus. We're able to serve staff kids and they can do this. And especially because a lot of times boarding schools are, and they're beautiful locations, but they're not necessarily close to a lot of other public or private options. So there's a lot of resources and opportunities and things that I think both micro schools and conventional schools can learn from. And there's also, there's big public schools that are starting to look at this too. They're doing really differentiated segments within their districts, specifically like kind of like charter schools, right? The idea of charter schools in terms of we were having these sports academies and music academies. And that was, I think, the initial idea for the charter school movement. And then people kind of said, well, we really expect this to be like a conventional school environment. And then charter schools kind of said, well, we also have to adapt to that. And so they kind of moved to a more conventional learning environment when their initial idea was really to be innovative and to be a lot more like micro schools. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships within the space.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Looking ahead, what predictions do you have for the microschool landscape this year and beyond? And what do you think school leaders, both traditional and alternative, should be paying attention to?
I mean, um, I think that, anywhere that they decide to have public funding for private education, you're going to see big micro school growth, right? I mean, Texas just voted on a voucher system, which, it's the, I think, second most populated state in the country. So that's going to really shake things up. So anytime that you see that, and I think there's also going to be more segmenting of school types. There's, sometimes I hear from parents where they're saying, oh, I'm looking at all these schools and everything sounds the same. How do I even distinguish what's this? And are they paying lip service to this and that? And so I think micro schools are really trying to differentiate themselves on the landscape. And I think that that's what other public, private, and micro schools will have to do to stay competitive within the market. And I think another thing too to look out for is additional partnerships like we just mentioned, right? So many opportunities within the private and public space as well. And so, there's orgs like Getting Smart, Transcend, Education Reimagined, Stand Together, Trust, and they're facilitating microschool growth too. Like they just pushed out a microschool financing program where you can get loans for, I can't remember, up to $75,000, something like that. But they're also pushing for community hub arrangements so that they can provide transport to different micro schools every morning to different communities, or they're able to provide after school care, maybe taking them to Boys and Girls Club or a private school that's offering it or a public school. So there's a lot more, I think, partnerships happening at a local level that are going to be coming down the pipeline. And I think, the sooner that everyone starts thinking about building partnerships, the better they're going to be positioned for the future. And because you can reach so many different markets of parents and different ideologies and things that maybe you hadn't thought about was a persona or profile for you, but maybe they are the right person, but maybe you also need a partnership to kind of get them in the door.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. I love you painting the picture of so many possibilities, and I think it's very interesting to see what's going to happen in the future because so much is changing now. So just like you mentioned, 10 years ago, I don't think I knew what a microschool was. Even maybe like 7 years ago, it wasn't like a widely known and talked about term. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's funny, like we even see micro schools that don't want to use the word school because of the mental model of what that comes from historically and like, the, intergenerational ideology and so, it's kind of like people are rethinking education in so many different ways. And so I think there's great possibilities for everyone. And I really think it's like a renaissance of education in some way. And maybe technology is enabling it. Absolutely it's technology is enabling it. But also I think, right, as AI advances and machine learning becomes so much more adept, we need to grow better humans, right? And so that's kind of perhaps where education will go.
Fascinating. This is actually a great, that was a great sense to lead us to our next question, which is, where we talk about our podcast, we talk about mindfulness, and that's part of, who we are and what we value. And I'm curious, like, as you're thinking about microschools and also the work that you do with microschools, how would you define mindfulness and how do you see it lived out?
I think that microschools is really, as far as mindfulness goes, and so part of the work that we always tried to do was create community, right? And I think it's taking care of ourselves, taking care of our learners, and taking care of our community, right? Because we're hopefully finding a need within the community and filling it through the education. But at the same time, our school founders, they're wearing so many hats, right? Maybe they're traditional educators who came in with grand ideas, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually I have to figure out how to do 401k and fix the toilet and choose all the curricula for next year and then do PD later today and a school tour. That's all on my list in the next 2 hours, right? So creating a support network for those founders and to be able to build community for inspiration at your school, for collaboration, partnerships, but for commiseration too, right? Because it's really hard being a small business owner. And so I think mindfulness from our sense is really trying to cultivate community, support one another. We're not coming from a competitive space. I really feel like the more options that are out there, the better it's going to be for families, the better it's going to be for what kind of future we can imagine educationally for our kids too. So building community, that's what we're all about.
I love that. I'm so excited by this conversation. I love the breadth of different types of microschools that are out there too. It's not just, you can't really stereotype it. So I appreciate learning more about it from that perspective. We're going to move on to rapid fire questions now. And the first one is, if you could put one book as mandatory reading in the high school curriculum, what would it be?
Such a hard question. It's like there's so many great books. I think 1984, it's still in a lot of required reading, but then there's also some book bans happening. But I think, it's never more prevalent for developing critical thinking. The idea of Big Brother is ever present now with technology, with so many different things happening. So I think it's still a classic that should be mandatory.
Thank you. And we'll add that to our Goodreads list. We have one for the podcast. So what is one app you can't live without?
It's nothing amazing. It's Google Maps. I'm literally, I don't know how I traveled the world being the worst person at directions. So I live and die by that. I mean, you guys probably remember MapQuest, printing out directions in MapQuest, and then the minute that it derails, you're like, oh, where am I? What's happening? So this is something I need. I mean, it's nothing cool or cutting edge, but it's necessity for me for life.
We've heard that one a few times, actually. What are you reading right now?
I'm one of those people who have like a million books on my nightstand. I'm really enjoying this Ikigai book by Ken Mogi, and it's talking, it has a lot of cultural aspects of Japan, but also, the motivation to do what you're good at, what gets you up in the morning, what impacts your life. So I'm enjoying that. I'm also reading The Survivors Club for a book club that I'm in. Yeah, those are two good ones. The Survivors Club has like all kinds of different situations and how you would adapt to them and things like that. Maybe a sort of apocalypse toolkit kind of vibe.
And what was the other one?
It's called Ikigai by
Oh,
Ken.
okay.
Yeah, you probably remember the Venn diagram. Sometimes they represent it that way of like what you're good at, what you're interested in, and what's your calling. So it's kind of the intersection of all of those.
Fascinating. Those sound like really amazing books.
It's
Um,
just like your logo, the Easy School Marketing. That's your Ikigai, Aubrey.
it is. It is. It's funny. Okay. Well, what is one great piece of advice you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think that there's a renaissance in education happening right now, and it's from AI, from entrepreneurship through microschools, big tech shifts that are happening. And so I think it's just a great time for school leaders, for people that are working in schools, that are advising schools, because founders have a lean budget, but that doesn't mean they don't have big aspirations. And some of these schools we've seen have start within 4 years' time, went from one campus to 60, went from one campus to 12 countries. So, I mean, there's just huge explosions, and there's an international appetite for it too. And so I think that, the only thing that is limiting us now is just our own thoughts and our own ideology about what education is, and our own kind of capacity to do so. So I think it's just a really great time to think about all the possibilities for kids in the future.
Thank you so much.
Where could people find you and learn more about microschools and what you do as well?
Yeah, come to microschools.com and check out the website. We just launched a training program we're super excited about. It's a dual certificate program with Harvard. We're partnering with Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so we're getting basically the best of both worlds, entrepreneurship and also really great instructional leadership. So come out and check us out there. You can find all kinds of different microschools all around the world. You can check out our training program. We do webinars on best practice. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Whitney, at microschool.com. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
And you have a newsletter too, right? Because I received something for you and I love it because I read it. That's where I learned about the Harvard thing. I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. On our website, microschools.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, and that comes out a couple of times a month. And so we talk about, and the thing, I try and culminate lots of different research and events that are happening all across like the world, microschool spaces. This isn't ours, but like there's a really great expert advice from our colleagues in the UK on progressive education, on how to launch an online school. And they have really successful online entrepreneur schools that are going to be there talking about, and you can pick their brain. So it's that kind of stuff we're trying to culminate, so people have lots of ideas and thoughts, and they can know about different stuff that's happening all around the world.
That's awesome. And before we log off, I did want to give you a shout out from one conference organizer to another. You recently had your Microschools conference and in Washington, D.C., right? So
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. However big or small it is, it's a lot of work. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great day. This episode is brought to you by Enquiry Tracker. We believe that every inquiry is an opportunity, and with Enquiry Tracker, you can unlock the full potential of your school's enrollment journey.
Say goodbye to missed opportunities and hello to a streamlined admissions process that prioritizes efficiency and effectiveness. Discover the leading solution for school admissions and marketing. Visit inquirytracker.net to book a personalized demo today. That's inquiry with an E, tracker.net.
Thanks for joining us on the Mindful School Marketing Podcast.
We'd love it if you pop into iTunes and leave a review, 5-star preferred. Let us know how you like the show. It helps us improve what we're doing and helps others find us too.